It's time to take a deep breath and quiet the mind. Every breath and thought was energy that brought us to our experience in this moment. We are going to exercise our beliefs in the possible. We will bend and create our own realities. Let's explore how to square our recovery and thrive in life. I welcome you to Recovery Squared Radio with your host, Steve Wofford.
Welcome to Recovery Squared Radio. I'm Steve Wofford. I have Jennifer Butterfill with me, and she is a Gong Fu Cha practitioner and also an Austin native. So, Jennifer, thank you for coming on the show with me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I originally met Jennifer at a life party up here in Austin. I've talked about it a number of times on the show already, but instead of re-explaining this, I was just talking with Jennifer a moment ago, and I absolutely loved her explanation on what a life party is. Why don't you tell us your explanation of what a life party is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the life parties are really about a collaborative experience amongst a group of super conscious individuals that come together with the intention of wanting to remember. And I feel certain I've been a part of a lifestyle in the past where I've surrounded myself with people who are coming together, and a lot of the activities that are shared are to forget. And so I really enjoy the life parties because they bring this high frequency and high vibration to any space just by people being.
That's awesome. I love that explanation. It's about connecting, and it's not about just forgetting, because that's what drugs and alcohol, they really just help you forget who you really are and all the problems you have. So when I met Jennifer there, she was serving tea at one of the parties, and I became really interested into the practice because I could see the meditative qualities of it. But it wasn't really in my awareness until I went there, and I was like, wow, that's kind of like meditating, how they're doing it, and just that it comes from the East. And so I thought it was kind of interesting. And then so when I saw Jennifer's post on Facebook that she had entered recovery and she posts a lot of stuff on tea, I was like super inspired by that. And I was like, I want to have her on the show because that's so cool. People could really integrate that sort of practice into their life in general, whether it's just wellness or recovery. And so why don't you explain to the listeners what Gong Fu Cha is?
Absolutely. I'll just talk about my experience with it. So I became introduced to Gong Fu Cha through meeting the owner of the West China Tea Company. His name is Sohan Fan, and he has invested a lot of his time in creating relationships with the tea growers on the mountaintops in China. And so he's spent years of his life hiking thousands and thousands of miles to meet these people and develop relationships with them. Once he moved back to America, he began sourcing and importing Chinese tea. And essentially, Gong Fu Cha means mindful action tea. Gong Fu being very similar to Kung Fu, which means mindful action, and Cha meaning tea in Chinese. And the practice of Gong Fu Cha, it's not necessarily a tea ceremony, it's more of a discipline. And so I serve tea to myself every day using small vessels that promote mindfulness. And so essentially the small vessel, the small teacup that we use, we regard it with reverence in the sense that it is the only cup of tea in the world.
That's powerful. And you can tell, I mean, I have mindfulness and meditative practices. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, wow, I can see the similarities. There was that reverence there that, like, you're being mindful. You can tell by the person who's serving it. And it almost like rubs off on you, right?
Yeah, it draws you in, it attracts you. And I think it's not just the spirit of the tea leaf itself, but also the mindfulness and care that have gone through every step of the service of the tea. So from the seed that's put in the ground to the diligence in picking the tea leaf every 2 days and then processing it to make certain types of tea and then selling it at market or shipping it directly to America as we did, and then steeping it with, the right temperature, the right amount of time, using the breath to know when you're ready to pour the tea. And then, of course, the most pleasurable part that, the people who grow it don't get to experience firsthand other than their service is when we get to actually serve it to the tea drinkers. It's a really beautiful process, and it's definitely changed my life.
That's awesome. I can tell. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your story on kind of what brought you to where you're at right now and this new appreciation for tea?
Absolutely. I fell in love with this style of serving tea. I think we've all been drinking tea our whole lives to some degree, and some of us end up preferring coffee. And I definitely was one of those people when I was introduced to this concept. I loved the way that it brought people together. I loved the conversations that were being had and how authentic they were and how people brought themselves, whether it was a sad emotional state, an angry emotional state, something that they felt really strongly about, and maybe someone else felt strongly on the other side of the spectrum, and they could come together and have those conversations. And it was a movement for peace for me. Just the idea of sitting down and drinking tea and doing this for several hours, and also getting to explore the vast world of tea. It's really a science. Carnelia sinensis is the tea plant that we drink. And many people who I've served tea to are very fascinated by that aspect of it. Whereas I personally identify with the heightened sense of spirituality that I receive from the service of tea. So there's really a little bit for everybody in it.
Right.
Originally, I got sucked in very quickly. I was just very into this style of drinking tea. And I found myself, instead of going to the bar, spending $10 on a tea sit at the tea house. And so when it came time for me to give up alcohol from my life, I found that I wanted to be at parties where people were serving tea. And so, yeah, that was definitely a great support for me in my recovery.
Well, I think that's kind of interesting, and I'm curious to know. So you wanted to stop drinking in that whole scene, but you also had this practice kind of the tail end of that, right?
Yeah.
So explain to me, what was that like? What was that point where you're like, I can't do this anymore?
I had come to my rock bottom, if you will, over the 4th of July weekend at a festival called Co-Creation Festival, and I had developed an addiction with cocaine and alcohol as well. And so the two kind of went hand in hand for me. And one of the people that is most dearest in my life, I had managed to keep it a secret for the most part for about a year from that person. And I really came to the conclusion on my own. I was tired of living in this alternative reality where I didn't have control, and I knew that there was a better way, and I realized that it had spiraled out of control, and I felt like I lost myself, and I felt like my friends didn't really know who I was because I didn't know who I was. And so I went to this person that I deeply care about for help, and I was very fortunate to have this person in my life because they are someone who has cultivated really healthy habits in their life and doesn't drink alcohol or use the drugs that I was using. So I was very blessed to have support to reach out to immediately. And this person called my mom, and we kind of had an intervention, and I was fortunate enough to have the support of my mother and honesty and the courage to share that with her. And she suggested I started a program. She's like, I can't do it for you. You got to do it for yourself. And so the next day I went to a meeting and just felt so held by the women in the community here in Austin, and got a sponsor and started working a program and just started to replace those unhealthy habits in my life with really positive experiences and creating amazing vibrations in my life, and really wanting to serve in other ways and change the world however I can.
I love that. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So I find it fascinating that you had all this stuff like literally at your fingertips, like where you were at that rock bottom point, right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm like looking back at, my death and destruction, and the relationships I had were all toxic. My parents, my family, absolutely everything in a strange town. And I didn't learn about a lot of these mindfulness practices, meditation, yoga until like a year clean. And I was really slugging it out, grinding out my quote unquote recovery. And actually one of the reasons this show started was because I didn't have a lot of those resources. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go create them. Go create the life that you want. And so I love that you were able to fall into a lot of that stuff and just kind of have more of those things that you really wanted, right?
Yes. I feel so blessed to have been introduced to yoga at the age of 6.
Wow.
By my aunt. I grew up in recovery. My mother was in the program and worked it throughout my childhood and adolescence. And meditation has always been something that has called to me from an early age. Just this idea that we are meant to self-actualize and we are all working towards enlightenment, whether we are awake to that concept or not. We are all on the path of self-actualization. That's my belief. And just where we all came from and where we go when we die. I had several experiences growing up. When I was 16, my father took his own life, and that was the first real tragedy in my life. And I struggled with that for many years. And shortly after, I had a lover of 4 years overdose and pass away on my 21st birthday. And that was the first time I ever really thought about, where are you? You're on the other side, but where are you? You're not in your physical form anymore after knowing someone in their physical being for so long. And that's when I began to believe in a higher power and just wanting to come to understand and know that within myself, that we are all connected. And part of my daily practice in meditation, I've been practicing Sufi chanting for about 3.5 years now. And it's essentially this idea that we are washing away our ego, that we are dissolving and polishing our souls to be hollow, empty vessels. So yeah, I do feel like I was very blessed to be exposed to so many different tools for recovery when I finally made the choice to become sober. And I couldn't be more thankful.
That's awesome. When I hear you thinking back, first I was thinking, there was a lot of things I didn't have, like when it comes to mindfulness and, intuition. But, I grew up in a Christian family and I always felt like that love of Christ, and I always knew love and forgiveness. And so I oftentimes wonder, because I had a lot of friends that died from overdoses too, and I know what it's like to lose friends, and that's a very tough thing. And part of me wonders why that didn't happen to me. Because in some ways I was like just as bad. But I really feel like there was always something in me that always knew. But I also just didn't know how to. I think it was a lot of my mind. I was so mind and ego driven that it was like the mind was calling the show. My heart didn't know how to lead. And so it wasn't until I really learned that I was able to go, oh, okay, I get it now. Right?
Totally. And, it's funny that you mention the essence of leading with the heart, because my guide, and I'm reminded of this saying so often, is look with the eye of the heart and don't look back. Mm-hmm. And that's just been a profound choice of words for me in my recovery, because there is so much doubt and uncertainty in our lives, whether we're using drugs and alcohol to numb the feelings of anxiety of how to deal with that or not. Uncertainty is a constant, and the essence of just relaxing into the unknown and the mystery of life and living life with curiosity has been incredible. It's an incredible experience because there is so much fear that our hearts can feel, and that's a very real emotion. I think, being a part of these life parties and using Gong Fu Cha and meditation and yoga and all these different tools, it really allows us to just be able to breathe more and essentially have more guidance and support in navigating that. So
yeah, that's always tricky. And I haven't shared on my podcast yet, but I'm moving to Bali, like I told you earlier.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so excited. But you want to talk about fear. As basically when I checked in, I was to go on a journey. It was kind of up to me where I get to go. And Bali came up. I didn't do a lot of research. It just kind of came up, and I'm going to go to Ubud, Bali. And it happens to be a very spiritual and healing place. And what I found interesting is in some of my writings that I previously wrote, where I wanted to travel around the world with my boys, the first place that I listed was Bali. And 6 months later, that's where I end up committing to stay, was in Bali. And when I was called to just leave all my possessions, I had all this fear that I'm just supposed to leave absolutely everything. Because when I first left my marriage of 20 years, it was about leaving all that, but then creating this whole other life. And that was a whole very painful thing to do. But I was so conditioned with my limiting beliefs and so mind driven and ego driven that it was a battle in between my heart and my mind. And it was really hard to see that. And as I exercise that muscle, now it's similar, but I can simply just observe my mind and what it's doing. It's trying to keep me safe, right? It's trying to keep me safe from the saber-toothed tiger, right? And I still feel those, get rid of your car, get rid of all your nice furniture, get rid of your apartment, get rid of all these things. You're to take your camera bag, a microphone, and a backpack and go on the other side of the world. But that's me leading with my heart. My heart's going. And I've been asked, people are like, well, Steve, how long have you thought about this? Like, think? My heart knows. There is no thinking anymore. I love that you said to lead with the eye of the heart and to not look back. And like, that's what I'm doing. And it's interesting this time around because like I can simply observe all those fears and just let them be.
That's so wonderful. And I think that was the message that I feel I am in the process of fully embodying too, and I think for a lot of people who are new to recovery, sinking into that uncertainty and dealing with life's obstacles in a way that they are used to using drugs and alcohol can feel very uncomfortable. And so I just want to take a moment for all those who are suffering with addiction that are listening to this right now, that it will be okay, and that your breath is a force of your internal power and your being. And may your hearts be soothed, and may you find compassion for yourself and others.
That's powerful. I love that. When I was driving over here, my mind's just going, I got to get rid of this. I got to figure this out. Plane tickets, passports. And like the mind's just like, I don't normally have problems sleeping, but the last couple of weeks have been a little bit like, okay, mind, just chill. We're cool. And one of the things I tell myself, I just need my breath and God. That's all I need. Like I have those two things. So nothing else matters. Right. And that was a very hard lesson for me to learn. Absolutely.
One of the chants I recite on a daily basis, it's Arabic. It's called La ilaha illallah. And it means there is no thing but God. There's nothing but God in all of us, all the time, everywhere. So even when there is a really negative circumstance, or at least our minds perceive it to be so, God is in that too. And it's in with us. And so I love remembering that also. Thanks for bringing that into the forefront of my consciousness.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's always we're at this state of remembering, right? It's because we forgot. Like even my trip, I've wanted to do this since I was a kid, but I'm just now remembering what I ran away from.
Yeah, the lighting of the fire in our hearts. I feel like so many of us let our passions dwindle because of the confines of the structures around us and the way that our society is evolving can feel limiting at times. And so it's interesting that all we need to do is remember. And, just the essence of chanting La ilaha illallah throughout the day, but for a concentrated period of time in the morning and in the evening really plays into what I experience as the washing of the ego, the washing of the soul, and feel so much more grounded as a result of that. So
that's powerful. So if someone wanted to practice Gong Fu Cha, because they're going to hear this, they're going to say, that sounds really cool, but maybe I don't have a live party to go to or a tea house to go where I could learn about this stuff. How would someone, without anything, get involved in something like this? Is this something they could do by themselves, or where do you find this sort of practice? Because I had no idea where to find it. I just happened to stumble into it.
Absolutely. I am so happy to share ways to connect with Gong Fu Cha. The way that I came into it, as I said, was through the West China Tea Company. They're always posting things on their Facebook page, different videos of the practice. If you literally Google Gong Fu Cha, it's 3 words, GONGFUCHA, there will be an abundance of information, websites, blogs, sources for teaware, for the tea itself, if you wanted to purchase it in your home, videos on how to serve the tea. If you're living here in Austin, I would definitely go down to the tea spot. It's down on campus, right behind Spider House on 29th and Guadalupe. And Sohan, the owner of the company, teaches classes every Saturday from noon to 6. And they're very reasonably priced considering you're going to be obtaining skills that can help ground you throughout your lifetime. And I invite all those who are interested in the love of tea to go exploring and meet the people growing the tea, meet the people who are harvesting the tea, that are selling the tea, because there is an entire world of tea out there. And I'm only just beginning to uncover some of it, and I think the owner of the West China Tea Company could say the same thing. And he's been studying tea for a decade now. So there's so many resources out there, but just to name a few, definitely go looking on the internet for a first step. I would say there's a lot of information out there for people to access.
And I'll put some links in the show notes so that way people can maybe have some resources on looking for all the things that we're talking about. So, Jennifer, if there was one thing you would do to square your recovery, what would that one thing be?
The one thing I would do to square my recovery is commit to myself. And I think what that means for me is just a quiet, silent knowing that I can believe in myself. And like I mentioned earlier, my mom had told me, I can't bring you to these places. It's something that you have to do on your own. And so what I can do in the meantime, like supplementing that in my lifestyle, is just filling my time with people and activities that serve me and serve me in a way that I can serve others. And so I love community service work. I love working with children, gardening, yoga, meditation. And so I think that there are a lot of powerful outlets that have blessed me with being a part of my life. So just a commitment to myself.
That's awesome. Well, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. You're so beautiful. You're so inspiring. I love what you're doing. And this show was created because of inspiration of what you're putting out and the service that you're creating. And so I appreciate that so much. And thank you.
Well, Steve, I appreciate your time. And it's been a pleasure. I'm so highly honored to be a part of your show. And I really enjoyed speaking with you. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you. I absolutely love that show. I thought that was such an interesting concept to talk about, and using tea as a way to recover. I want to thank Jennifer for coming on the show. I think she's amazing and does cool stuff. I also want to invite you to visit recoverysquared.com, where you can access the show notes, and we'll put links to everything we talked about on the show. And then also if you click the Get Access button on recoverysquared.com, I'll send you the Recovery Squared Belief Guide and Living Your Infinite Potential. And I would also like to connect with you. Feel free to email me at steve@recoverysquared.com. I love you, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Recovery Squared Radio. Please visit recoverysquared.com for access to resources on squaring your recovery. And as a reminder, act without doing. Create space between your thoughts and actions.